Chapter 2. Kate took a deep breath and glanced around before entering the store. It wasn't like she was doing anything illegal or even illicit, but the thought of combing through the paper for a husband still felt foreign to her. Thankfully, there were few customers in the store to notice her, and she was able to grab a local paper and make her way to the corner to read in private without any questions. While the thought of leaving her beloved Boston left a disgusting taste in her mouth, she was quickly approaching the spinster age of 25, and all the men around her seemed intimidated by her brains, or more likely her strong-willed spirit, as her brother Robert liked to remind her. Well, not all the men, unfortunately, but any decent man that she might be interested in pursuing a relationship with anyway. Unfortunately, Kate had always held a grand notion of love, especially after watching the relationship of her parents, so agreeing to marry a complete stranger sent an unsettling feeling through her stomach every time she thought about it. But her options had run out when her mother had joined her father in heaven. Kate glanced around one more time to be sure no one was watching. Then she opened the paper and scanned until she found the ads she was looking for. 40-year-old widowed rancher, 5'7" and 150 pounds, looking for wife who can be mother to his 3 kids. 3 kids? Kate shook her head and drew a line through that one. While she wanted kids one day, she didn't feel confident stepping into the role immediately. 50-year-old pastor, 5'8", 180 pounds, seeks wife for companionship and to lead women's socials at local church. A pastor's wife wouldn't be too bad, but the age difference was more than Kate could stomach. After all, she was barely 25, which would make this man twice her age. And wasn't the lifespan shorter in the West? Knowing her luck, he would die shortly after she arrived, and she'd be left all alone. 30-year-old bar owner, 5'7", 140 pounds, seeks wife and possible waitress. While this one was closer in age, Kate had no desire, or skills for that matter, to work in a bar. If she wanted to pursue that avenue, she could just entertain Jonathan James's offer. The pickings were slim this month, it seemed. Just one ad left. 32-year-old farmer, 5'9", 180 pounds, in search of brave woman to help on homestead. Well, she didn't know much about farming, or what help on a homestead might entail, but no one would say Kate wasn't brave. She had even taken shooting lessons with her brother and father. Closing her eyes, she sent a plea up to God for guidance. There was no voice in her ear, but her anxiety about answering the ad lessened. Crossing her fingers this man wouldn't be a con man or an abuser, she made her way to the counter.
"Hello, Miss Kate. What can I help you with today?"
Mr. Gaines was the elderly owner of the newspaper. He wore a black vest over his shirt, and a pair of old spectacles sat on the bridge of his nose. But it was his smile that always put her at ease. Mr. Gaines always seemed to have a smile and a kind word for his customers, even when it was clear he was battling his own issues. Kate cleared her throat and dropped her eyes to the counter, still embarrassed to be doing this. "I wanted to inquire how I might go about answering an ad." She pushed the paper across to him and pointed at the ad.
Let me see."
He lifted the paper with one hand while pushing up his glasses with the other.
"Mail order bride."
He lowered the paper to look at Kate.
"Does that mean we're losing you?"
A heated flush flared across Kate's face. Well, there isn't much left for me here with my mother and father gone.
Don't you still have a brother?
Mr. Gaines asked kindly. Kate nodded. I do, but Robert just married, and he's trying to get his practice up and running. I would just be in the way. She didn't add the fact that his wife Abigail appeared to despise her, and the thought of staying in their house much longer held little appeal.
Well, if you're sure,
he said, though the tone of his voice told her he wasn't convinced. He reached below the cabinet and pulled out a pad of paper and a pencil.
Generally, you write the man back, and a correspondence ensues to see if it's a good fit.
Oh, Kate stammered. She had not realized she would need to reply with more than an acceptance. Thank you. She took the pad of paper and the pencil. I will return this shortly. Kate headed back to the corner and sat down at the table, thinking for a moment. What was she supposed to say? Was she supposed to include her physical description as well? She'd thought it was a little odd that heights and weights were a part of the ad, but she supposed physical appearance was still important, even through the mail. She placed the pencil on the paper and scribbled out. Dear Sir, my name is Kate Whidby. I am a brave 25-year-old woman, 5 foot 7 inches and 120 pounds. I have dark hair and blue eyes and am looking for love and adventure in a new area. I saw your ad in my paper, and although I do not know much about farming, I am a quick study and think I could be the woman you are looking for. Please advise if this is acceptable. I would like to travel as soon as possible. Kate Whidby. She folded the letter and returned to Mr. Gaines. Do you have an envelope I could use to send this? Mr. Gaines supplied one from under the counter and handed it to her. Kate quickly jotted her name and address down and sealed the envelope. She held it out to Mr. Gaines, but he shook his head.
I'm sorry, I can't handle it from here. Take it to the post office. They will send it out, and your response will come back through them.
Oh. Kate retracted her arm, tucking the envelope close to her chest, and trying to force back the heat she could feel crawling up her neck. How long do you think it will take to get a reply?
I don't know for sure, but my guess would be about 2 weeks.
Kate's jaw dropped open. 2 weeks? She didn't know what she had expected since the mail traveled by horseback, but 2 weeks each way would mean another few months in her brother's house, and she wasn't sure she could handle it. Mr. Gaines nodded and scratched the side of his bald head with the back of the pencil.
Yes, ma'am, unless you'd like to telegraph it. That costs considerably more, though.
Kate fingered the few coins she had managed to find in her parents' bedroom as she was packing up the last items she'd been able to take. No, she had better be frugal and spend only a little. No, 2 weeks is fine. Perhaps she could find a temporary job. It would be nice to have some money for the trip. Kate left the store and stopped at the post office, dropping off the letter and paying the small fee before she continued on to the mercantile to pick up a few items. Once inside the store, she loaded the basket with the necessities: flour, sugar, teas, and then picked up a few pieces of penny candy. Kate felt guilty for imposing on Robert and Abigail by staying with them at their house, especially so early in their marriage. But her parents had rented their house, and as Kate had stayed home to care for her parents, she had no money to continue the payments after their death. Plus, society frowned on women living alone, so she had been forced to move out. "Morning, Miss Kate." Sally, the plump owner of the mercantile, smiled at her as she approached the counter. Kate had often wondered how Sally had married before she did. But, like Anna, Sally embraced the roles society expected of women. So, while she might not have the perfect physical figure men were looking for, She had the personality they wanted. Besides, technically, Kate had received 2 marriage proposals. Funny how she had rebuffed those proposals because she felt the men didn't have pure intentions. Yet now she was planning to travel across the country and marry a man she'd never met and whose intentions she definitely did not know. "Hello, Sally," she said, placing the items on the counter. "How is business?" "It is not too bad." Sally smiled, but it was a hesitant one. Then she glanced behind her and leaned forward, whispering this time. "Tell you the truth, it has been a little slow the last few months. John is stressed about it." Kate smiled and leaned in to reply. "Well, I will keep praying it will pick up." A ray of relief flooded Sally's face, and she began tabulating the cost of the items. "That is mighty kind of you, Kate. Will I see you at church on Sunday?" Of course, I would not miss it. Kate never missed a service if she could help it, but Sally's question sent her mind spinning. God was an important part of her life. Would there be proper churches in Texas? She grabbed her bag of supplies, but the question continued to plague her as she made her way to Robert's house. "I think you should think about it," Pauline said as she spooned soup into Jesse's bowl. "I've heard the robberies have been getting more frequent, and the sheriff could use more good men." She placed his bowl on the table and surveyed the table to make sure all the bowls were filled. "I agree," her mother Iris said from the stove, where she was pulling out bread to go with dinner. The smell of yeast filled the air as small wisps of steam drifted from the loaf. "Your father said he heard tell of another stagecoach getting robbed in Opdyke West. That's not far from here, and the whole business makes me nervous." Jessie grabbed Pauline's hand as her mother turned back to the stove.
"If I become a deputy, it would mean delaying the homestead even more. I want it to be finished for when we marry, and I have a hankering to be married already."
Pauline placed her empty hand on his cheek, and he leaned into her soft palm. "We've waited this long, Jesse Jennings. We can wait a little longer. Besides, I would feel guilty moving into our nice new home while other people's houses and businesses are still being attacked." Jesse smiled and shook his head.
"That is why I love you, Pauline Masterson. You have such a good heart."
He wrapped an arm around her waist to bring her closer so he could take in her sweet smell. But she pushed him away and crossed to her chair. "We are not going to let this soup get cold, Jessie," she said playfully. "I worked too hard on it. Now sit."
"Yes, ma'am,"
Jesse said, taking his seat. He smiled as he placed his napkin on his lap.
"I would sure hate for anything you make to go to waste."
A soft pink color tinged Pauline's fair cheeks as she sat across from him. "Well, it should just be another minute," Iris said, placing the bread on the table. The cabin door banged open, and Pauline's father Caleb and her brother James entered.
"You weren't about to start without us, were you?"
James was tall and beefy, and his frame filled the doorway. Pauline's father was slightly shorter, but nearly as broad-shouldered. While Pauline was slender, Jessie wondered if the large bone structure would run in her genes when they had children of their own. "No, we were waiting," Pauline said. "I just dished the stew, so it should still be warm." "Yes, come and sit," her mother said, patting the empty place at the table beside her.
"I am sorry we're late,"
James said, limping into the large room that served as the main living space. He scowled down at his foot.
"It takes me longer to finish chores now since my accident."
James had the habit of frequenting the saloon a little too often, and a skirmish one night had ended with shots fired, One had hit his foot, shattering the bone.
"It looks as though your foot is healing, though,"
Jesse said, as James made it to the table and fell into the chair to his right. Caleb took the chair to Jesse's left.
"Humph,"
James mumbled through a mouthful of soup. As usual, he had not waited to pray, but had simply dug into the meal. Manners did not seem to be a priority to James. But Jesse did not know if that was due to the accident or had always been part of his personality. "Well, let's not let the food get cold," Iris said, ignoring James's slurping and picking up her own spoon. Jesse lowered his head to say a silent prayer and then smiled at Pauline, who had done the same. The rest of her family often forgot to pray at meals, but he and Pauline never missed the opportunity. Jesse could not wait until they were married, and it could be just her and him at every meal. Though James and her parents served as decent chaperones, they made less than stellar dinner companions. The rest of the dinner passed in an uncomfortable silence, and Jesse found himself relieved when it ended. After Pauline and her mother had cleaned the dishes, Jesse gathered his things to go, and Pauline walked him to the front door. Jesse reached for her hand, but a cough from James forced him to drop it back to his side. Jesse wanted to take her in his arms and feel her soft lips against his. But if holding hands was frowned upon, that would definitely have to wait a little longer.
"Good night, Pauline,"
he said with a bow.
"I look forward to another meal tomorrow."
Jesse's family was no longer living, but Pauline's family had been kind enough to offer him a chair for dinner each night. "I do as well," she said, and smiled her sweet smile at him.